The sound of Rebecca Carter's wedding dress tearing echoed through the dusty chapel in Tombstone, Arizona, as she stumbled on the wooden steps, her left leg failing her at the most crucial moment of her life. It was August 23, 1879, and what should have been the happiest day for any 22-year-old bride had just become a nightmare of public humiliation and shattered dreams. The 43 people gathered in the small frontier church gasped collectively as Rebecca's carefully hidden limp became impossible to conceal, her elegant blue dress catching on the rough-hewn steps as she struggled to maintain her balance. William Hayes, her prospective groom, stood frozen at the altar, his face transforming from nervous anticipation to horror and disgust as he realized the woman he had agreed to marry was not the perfect bride he had been promised through their correspondence. Rebecca had traveled over 2,000 miles from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, carrying nothing but a worn leather suitcase in desperate hope for a new beginning in the Arizona territory. Her family, the once prosperous Carters, had lost everything in the financial panic of 1873, and Rebecca's injury from a carriage accident 3 years earlier had made her unmarriageable in the rigid social circles of the East Coast. When William Hayes's letter arrived through a matrimonial agency, seeking a wife to help manage his successful cattle ranch outside Tombstone, Rebecca had seen it as divine intervention. She had carefully crafted her responses to emphasize her education, domestic skills, and moral character while deliberately omitting any mention of her physical limitations, believing that love and compatibility would overcome such obstacles. William Hayes, 35 years old and owner of one of the most profitable ranches in Cochise County, had specifically requested a bride who could bear children, manage household staff, and represent his social standing in the growing community of Tombstone. His first wife had died of tuberculosis 2 years earlier, leaving him with a vast ranch house that felt empty and a social position that required a wife to maintain properly. The letters from Rebecca had painted a picture of an intelligent, capable woman from a good family, exactly what he needed to restore his domestic life and enhance his reputation among the territory's elite ranchers and businessmen. As Rebecca struggled to her feet, her face burning with embarrassment, the wedding guests began murmuring among themselves with the cruelty that often emerged when people witnessed someone else's misfortune. "Did you see how she limps?" whispered Mrs. Dorothy Palmer, the banker's wife, to her companion. "How could she deceive poor William like that?" The words carried clearly through the small chapel, designed for intimate gatherings where privacy was impossible to maintain. Rebecca's hands trembled as she smoothed her dress, trying to regain some dignity while facing the man who held her entire future in his hands. William's expression hardened as the reality of the situation sank in, his business-minded approach to marriage making it impossible for him to see past Rebecca's physical imperfection to the intelligent, determined woman who had shown remarkable courage in traveling across the country to start a new life. "This is not what was agreed upon," he declared loudly enough for everyone present to hear. "I was led to believe I was marrying a healthy, capable woman, not someone who can barely walk down the aisle without falling." His words hit Rebecca like physical blows, each syllable destroying the dreams she had carefully constructed during the long journey west. Reverend Jonathan Mitchell, an elderly man who had performed dozens of frontier weddings under various challenging circumstances, attempted to mediate the situation with Christian compassion. "William, perhaps we could discuss this privately," he suggested gently. "Marriage vows speak of accepting one another for better or worse, in sickness and in health." But William had already made his decision, his practical nature overriding any consideration of mercy or understanding for Rebecca's circumstances. The successful rancher had not built his fortune by accepting damaged goods, and he viewed his potential bride through the same lens he used to evaluate livestock. Outside the chapel, Marcus Stone guided his horse slowly down Tombstone's main street, the empty right sleeve of his shirt pinned neatly against his side as he handled the reins with practiced efficiency. The 32-year-old cowboy had lost his arm in a stampede 18 months earlier, and the accident had cost him not just his limb but his job, his fiancée, and his place in a society that valued physical completeness above character or determination. Marcus Stone had been riding through Tombstone's dusty streets when the sound of raised voices from the chapel caught his attention, his instincts sharpened by 18 months of learning to navigate a world that suddenly viewed him as incomplete and undesirable. The accident that claimed his right arm had occurred during a routine cattle drive when a spooked longhorn bull charged directly into the herd, creating a stampede that trampled everything in its path. Marcus had thrown himself from his horse to save a fallen cowboy, managing to pull the man to safety but losing his own arm beneath the hooves of terrified cattle. The irony wasn't lost on him that his moment of heroism had transformed him from a respected ranch foreman into a drifter whom most employers considered unemployable. Before the accident, Marcus had been engaged to Victoria Ashford, daughter of one of Denver's most prominent banking families, with plans to purchase his own ranch and start a family that would establish his place among Colorado's rising cattle barons. Victoria had visited him exactly once during his recovery, her horrified expression when she saw his bandaged stump telling him everything he needed to know about their future together. The letter breaking their engagement arrived a week later, filled with polite phrases about changed circumstances and incompatible life paths that couldn't disguise the simple truth that she found his disability repulsive and socially unacceptable. The months following his recovery had been a harsh education in how quickly society's respect could evaporate when physical perfection was lost. Ranch owners who had once competed for his services now looked past him to hire less experienced but physically complete cowboys. Former friends treated him with awkward pity that was more painful than outright rejection, and women who had once flirted with the handsome foreman now averted their eyes when he passed. Marcus had learned to adapt his riding, roping, and daily tasks to accommodate his missing limb, but adapting to the loneliness and social isolation proved far more challenging than mastering one-handed techniques. The heated voices from the chapel grew louder, and Marcus could distinguish William Hayes's angry tone from the softer, more desperate voice of a woman trying to defend herself. Marcus knew Hayes by reputation, a successful but ruthless businessman who treated human relationships with the same calculating coldness he applied to cattle trading. The rancher's first wife, Eleanor, had been a gentle woman whose quiet sadness during her final years suggested that marriage to William had been more of a business arrangement than a loving partnership. Her death from tuberculosis had been mourned more genuinely by the townspeople than by her own husband, who had begun seeking a replacement wife within months of her funeral. Dismounting carefully and securing his horse to the hitching post with practiced one-handed efficiency, Marcus approached the chapel steps just as the doors burst open and William Hayes emerged, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Behind him came a young woman in a torn blue wedding dress, her dark brown hair disheveled and her green eyes bright with unshed tears as she struggled to maintain her dignity despite an obvious limp that affected her left leg. The contrast between her refined features and William's harsh expression told Marcus immediately what kind of scene had just unfolded inside the sacred building. "The next eastbound train leaves tomorrow morning," William announced loudly enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "I'll pay for your ticket back to Philadelphia, but I won't be responsible for your welfare beyond that. This deception ends here." His words carried the finality of a business transaction being terminated, with no consideration for the human consequences of his decision. Rebecca Carter stood alone on the chapel steps, surrounded by curious townspeople but utterly isolated in her humiliation and despair, her carefully planned future crumbling around her like the desert sand that constantly swept through Tombstone's streets. Marcus felt a familiar anger rising in his chest, the same emotion that had sustained him through his own darkest moments when people treated him like damaged goods rather than a human being worthy of respect and compassion. He recognized in Rebecca's situation the same cruel judgment he had faced when his own perceived imperfection had cost him his livelihood, his fiancée, and his place in society. The difference was that Marcus had chosen to fight back against that judgment, while Rebecca appeared trapped by circumstances beyond her control, dependent on the charity of a man who viewed her as defective merchandise. The moment of decision arrived as Marcus watched Rebecca struggle to descend the chapel steps while maintaining what remained of her dignity. Marcus Stone stepped forward through the crowd of onlookers, his weathered face set with determination as he approached the chapel steps where Rebecca Carter stood frozen in her humiliation. The townspeople parted before him with the mixture of respect and discomfort that his missing arm always generated, their whispered conversations falling silent as they recognized the gravity of what was about to unfold. At 32, Marcus had learned to read people's reactions to his disability with painful accuracy, but he had also discovered that his own judgment of character had been sharpened by experiencing society's cruelty firsthand. What he saw in Rebecca's eyes wasn't self-pity or weakness, but the same stubborn courage that had carried him through his own darkest moments. "Miss Carter," Marcus said quietly, removing his hat with his left hand in a gesture of respect that contrasted sharply with William Hayes's dismissive treatment. "I couldn't help but overhear your situation, and I'd like to make you an alternative proposal if you're willing to listen." His voice carried the calm authority of a man who had learned to speak carefully and deliberately, knowing that his words might be his only weapons against a world that judged him by his physical limitations. Rebecca looked up at him with surprise, taking in his missing right arm and the genuine kindness in his weathered features, so different from the calculating coldness she had just experienced. William Hayes turned back toward them with obvious irritation, his business instincts alert to any interference with his plans to rid himself of an unwanted responsibility. "Stone, this doesn't concern you," he snapped, his tone carrying the arrogance of a man accustomed to having his decisions respected without question. "I've already made arrangements for Miss Carter's return journey, and there's nothing more to discuss." But Marcus had faced down charging bulls and survived 18 months of social rejection, making him immune to intimidation from a rancher whose wealth couldn't disguise his fundamental lack of character. "I'm asking Miss Carter to marry me," Marcus announced clearly, his words carrying across the gathered crowd and sending ripples of shock through the assembled townspeople. "Not as a business arrangement or social convenience, but because I believe two people who understand what it means to be judged unfairly by others might find happiness together." His proposal created a stark contrast to William's cold rejection, offering Rebecca not just escape from her immediate predicament but genuine partnership with someone who wouldn't view her limp as a character flaw or social liability. Rebecca felt her heart racing as she studied Marcus's face, searching for any sign of pity or condescension that would make his offer another form of charity disguised as kindness. Instead, she found recognition, the look of someone who had faced similar rejection and emerged stronger rather than bitter from the experience. "Mr. Stone," she said carefully, "I appreciate your kindness, but I need to understand what you would expect from such a marriage. I've already learned the dangers of misunderstanding and false expectations." Her directness impressed Marcus, who had grown tired of people who couldn't speak honestly about difficult subjects. "I expect partnership," Marcus replied simply. "I run a small ranch about 10 miles north of here, nothing as grand as Hayes's operation, but profitable enough to support a family. I lost my arm in a stampede, and most people think that makes me half a man. You walk with a limp, and apparently some people think that makes you damaged goods. I figure two supposedly damaged people might make one very strong partnership." His honesty created a moment of profound connection between them, two souls who had been rejected by society's narrow definitions of perfection but refused to accept those limitations as truth. The crowd's murmuring grew louder as people processed this unexpected development, their gossip ranging from admiration for Marcus's courage to speculation about whether two disabled people could successfully manage a ranch together. Dr. Benjamin Walsh, Tombstone's only physician, stepped forward with professional interest. "Marcus, you know I've treated both of your conditions," he said thoughtfully. "Miss Carter's limp is from an old injury that won't worsen with proper care, and your adaptation to one-armed work has been remarkable. Medically speaking, there's no reason you couldn't build a successful life together." His words carried weight in a community where the doctor's opinion often influenced public perception. Rebecca felt hope stirring in her chest for the first time since arriving in Tombstone, but she needed to know that Marcus's offer was based on genuine feelings rather than mere sympathy for her situation. Rebecca Carter looked into Marcus Stone's eyes and saw something she had never expected to find in the harsh Arizona territory, a man who understood that strength came from overcoming adversity rather than avoiding it entirely. "Mr. Stone," she said with growing conviction, "if you're serious about this proposal, then I accept. Not because I'm desperate, though I certainly am, but because I believe you're right about partnership being stronger than perfection." Her words created a ripple of amazement through the gathered crowd, most of whom had never witnessed such honest communication between potential spouses, especially under circumstances that would have crushed weaker spirits. Reverend Mitchell, who had remained silent during the confrontation, stepped forward with obvious relief at seeing his chapel transformed from a scene of cruelty back into a place of hope and commitment. "If both parties are willing," he said warmly, "I would be honored to perform a ceremony that celebrates love over appearances, partnership over property, and faith over fear." His words carried special weight in a frontier community where survival often depended on people supporting each other rather than tearing each other down based on superficial judgments. The wedding that followed was unlike anything Tombstone had ever witnessed, with Marcus and Rebecca exchanging vows that spoke honestly about accepting each other's limitations while building on each other's strengths. When Marcus struggled briefly to place the ring on Rebecca's finger using only his left hand, she steadied his wrist with gentle assistance, their first act of married cooperation witnessed by a crowd that was beginning to understand what true partnership looked like. William Hayes left in disgust before the ceremony concluded, his expensive carriage disappearing down the dusty street as he sought a bride who would better serve his image and social ambitions. For years later, the Stone Ranch had become one of the most respected operations in Cochise County, known not just for its healthy cattle and profitable harvests, but for the innovative techniques Marcus and Rebecca had developed to maximize efficiency despite their physical challenges. Rebecca's keen intelligence and education had transformed their record-keeping and business planning, while Marcus's intimate knowledge of cattle behavior and range management had steadily expanded their herd and improved their grazing lands. Their home, built with careful attention to accessibility and comfort, had become a gathering place for neighbors who appreciated the couple's genuine hospitality and practical wisdom. The partnership that began as mutual necessity had evolved into deep love and respect, with Marcus and Rebecca discovering that their shared experience of overcoming judgment had created an unshakable foundation for their marriage. Rebecca had learned to ride side saddle despite her limp, becoming an expert at spotting sick cattle and managing the ranch's financial affairs. Marcus had developed techniques for one-handed roping that impressed even experienced cowboys, and his ability to train horses with patience and understanding had earned him contracts with ranchers throughout the territory. Together, they had proven that determination and creativity could overcome any physical limitation. Their success had been highlighted the previous spring when Dr. Walsh brought a group of medical students from back east to observe how people with disabilities could live productive, fulfilling lives in frontier conditions. The visit had resulted in a published article in a Philadelphia medical journal, describing the Stone Ranch as an example of how love and partnership could triumph over society's limited expectations. Rebecca had taken particular satisfaction in learning that the article had been read by several families she had known in Pennsylvania, including some who had treated her injury as a source of shame rather than an opportunity for compassion. William Hayes, meanwhile, had married a perfectly healthy young woman from San Francisco 6 months after rejecting Rebecca, but his second marriage had ended in scandal when his wife ran away with a traveling salesman, taking a considerable portion of his assets with her. The irony was not lost on the people of Tombstone, who frequently observed that Hayes's pursuit of physical perfection had cost him the genuine partnership that Marcus and Rebecca had built from mutual understanding and respect. His ranch, while still profitable, had gained a reputation for harsh treatment of workers and livestock, reflecting an owner whose character flaws had proven more damaging than any physical disability. As Marcus and Rebecca sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the Arizona mountains in shades of gold and crimson, their hands intertwined in comfortable companionship, they often marveled at how a moment of public humiliation had led to the greatest happiness either had ever known. Their love story had become legendary in Tombstone, inspiring other couples to look beyond surface appearances to find the deeper qualities that made partnerships truly strong. Thank you for watching this incredible story of love, acceptance, and the triumph of character over circumstance. If this tale of courage and partnership touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing true stories from the American frontier. What did you think about Marcus and Rebecca's inspiring journey? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and tell us what other frontier love stories you'd like to hear. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss our weekly uploads of heartwarming historical tales that prove true love sees beyond physical appearances to the strength of the human spirit.